Hey, I am Mustafa Sharif. Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. And today I have the pleasure to welcome my friend from the master program that we studied together at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Hey, and welcome to Urbanistica podcast, Shang.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me, Mustafa.
Thank you so much for being here. And yes, it's going to be really interesting to hear the stories about the life between Stockholm and the Chinese city Suzhou. And
Yes,
are you excited about it?
yeah, I'm pretty excited to share all those stories that I have and the experience that I have.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So let's start. You are our storyteller for this episode. How would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what are you passionate about?
Okay, so I like to experience different things and in different places because I'm always curious about the new adventures. So I'm always seeking for new experience and feel it. So I was pretty much born in the west north of China, and then I moved to the middle part of China to study urban planning for several years. And then after I graduate, I moved to east part of the city in a city called Suzhou, which is a beautiful city, by the way. And then in there, I worked as an urban designer for several years. And then I thought, you've experienced like different cultures and stuff in different parts of China. So why not even going further and explore more? So I started to plan and then finally moved to Sweden several years ago. And I had my master here in Stockholm at KTH together with Mustafa. And then I moved to Netherlands for a while to study architecture and also experience the living style and the conditions in there. And now I'm coming back and work as an architect and urban designer here in Stockholm, in Sweden. So yeah, if I'm gonna introduce myself, I would pretty much just say that I am a seeker who's always been hungry about exploring new experiences.
That's very wonderful. So,
After seeking all those new experience or seeking this new experience of many places and cultures, I mean, seeing and feeling all those different relation between different cities and regions, it's super interesting to me. And I am very much passionate about seeking and designing for better living experience. So it's not only about the traveling or like staying the places, but also like through those seeking experiences, I could really started to see the relation of those different places and see the connection of them. And that's where I had the most passionate passion.
yeah, that's very interesting, and it will be so much interesting now when we hear your story and how you compare the different cities. So let's start with how was the life in Suzhou in the city, and tell us about like the structure of the neighborhood that you're living in.
Yes, definitely. Um, I've been living in different cities in China back then, but I would say Suzhou is the most beautiful and cozy city I've ever lived in China. So talking about the city in general, it is one of the oldest and the most famous city in China, both back in history and nowadays. And it's pretty much known for its Chinese traditional gardens in the old town and this amazing urban landscape throughout the city. And I remember there's an old saying in China that describes Suzhou like this. It goes like this: there's a paradise up in the sky called heaven, and there's a paradise down here on earth called Suzhou. And
Wow, that's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, and that's how beautiful and amazing the city is. And but in general, structurally, it is a little bit like Stockholm, I would say, because it also have this historic old town in the middle, and with the moat around it. You know, it's like the river, like back in the old times, they have this river to protect the city around the city, so to protect it from the enemies.
Yeah.
And nowadays, it gradually becomes like a more of a landscape viewing river. And then later on, all those different modern districts were developed and introduced in the pseudo city. And then they started to spread out around the old town. and then that's overall formed this Suzhou city in general. And that little town in the middle with the river around it, that's where I lived back then.
That's amazing. And how is the structure of the neighborhood? Was it like high-rise building or?
Yeah, that's actually also quite interesting because the road system and the street system, if we're talking about in Suzhou Old Town, it's quite different from the outside, like all those new districts and the modern sections. Um, People used to call Suzhou the Oriental Venice because it has this very rich and dense water canal system like Venice, so that they have this kind of a nickname in China. And also because this type of topography with all those water canals, it takes up a lot of lands, so that this makes the road system in the old town actually quite human and quite compact. I wouldn't say 80%, but I think at least 60 or 70% of the roads are down to the living scale. It's like 4 to 6 meters wide long with the sidewalk, and you would never see like 30 or 40-meter wide street next to your neighborhood. So in that sense, in the old town, you can't even drive very fast because of this very compact and narrow streets
Yeah.
in that part, which also makes the life pace quite relaxed and slow in the old town. And people do a lot of like socializing stuff on the street and do this interactions, talking, shopping, and then walk their dogs, and sometimes kids playing along the streets. So that for the local residents, those roads, like a compact, narrow roads and streets, are actually not that much for the cars or for the traffics. It's actually more for their lives. It becomes like a part of their living elements, like the outside, like the other parts of their corridor, their living room. There's also a very interesting thing about this old town. I think is the shops and stores in the old town is also quite different, and also interesting to talk about because normally you would see that in the urban area or in the city center, the stores and the shops are on the ground level, right? And along the walking street or along the sidewalk. And then there will be residential or office function built up on top, right? Um, but in Old Town, also as a central part of the city, a lot of stores and shops, there are actually like existing traditional buildings with this very typical Chinese architectural style. So most of them, they are actually kind of just one floor, and they don't have that much floor to build upon on. And then they will have their, so what they do is that they actually have the half of their area of the house that facing the street become their business area, so that that's the place where they have their business, have their restaurant open, and then have the customers coming in. And then at the back side of the area, the other half, and they live in that area, so that they will have their sleeping space, and they have their own personal space, so that in a sense that they kind of, instead of divide the space vertically like the other city center normally would do, in the Suzhou Old Town, most of the stores, they divide the area like horizontally, the front and back, so that in the morning you will see this very interesting view that people open their stores from inside, and then they started to, like the traditional way of running the store, like taking off the wooden panels from the door and start their business from the morning, like breakfast or barbershop and something like that. And such view, it actually gives you a strong feeling that they're not coming here like all those shop owners and the businessmen. They're not coming here for pure business from other places. They're actually right here along the street. They're living here. It becomes part of their memories, part of their living. So this gives you a very strong sense of belongings, and also gives you a feeling of extension of home. you know it's very calming and comfortable feeling that it's not a complete strange uh, public environment for you when you see this.
That's very beautiful description that you made as well. So do you think that, I mean, if they are sharing all the moments of their daily life almost in the same area,
Hmm.
will they want to go to visit other places, or they will be just at the same area and not really open to go to somewhere else?
This is pretty much about, I think, transportation and also the traffic system in Suzhou. So I think it's also very interesting, not only about the local city in Suzhou, but also it's about a larger scale in terms of how that could influence uh, people's life in Suzhou city. So that in general, recently in Suzhou, I think the car traffic with private vehicles percentage in the city, it has been growing up, but the bus and metros are still the main public transportation choice for the majority of people. And it's quite cheap price for the traffic card that you could use for bus and metro. And it also from the urban level, they have this urban public transportation strategy called 5 minutes walking radius to get every corner in the city you want to go after getting off public transport stop, so that the people, for example, who lives in the inner part, like the old town of the city, they would never worry about going outside of the old town and going to the other places, because most of them they will use this public transport. It's pretty convenient to have you to go anywhere like around the city.
S-
So yeah,
So I'm wondering also, so basically you're telling you can survive in the city if you don't have a car. You can visit every single part of the city just by the public transportation, right?
exactly. And all those like different public transportation form, for example, metro, bus, and sometimes even boats, they are kind of they are all connected, so they won't be isolated from each other. So I think that's also it's a very good part for the local residents. But here, also, what I want to highlight is the other um, network, like a traffic network. It's called high-speed train network system in China, which is a train network that connects most of the first and second or even third class cities with the minimum speed of 300 kilometers per hour. So what does it mean? It means that it tremendously changes people's life routine, especially in the southern part of China and cities. And you take me, for example, before I came to Sweden, I live in the old town of Suzhou, right? It's like the center part of the old town. But I work outside of the old town. My office is like about 12 kilometers away, and it takes me about like 45 minutes on average to commute between my home and my office, depending on if it's rush hour or the traffic situation. But it takes pretty much the same time for me to go to an international city around Suzhou, like Shanghai, like Nanjing, like Wuxi, several kilometers away. So that changes a lot for my life, because before, if I plan to go to attend an international conference or like some big events like national festivals, or visit my friends in another city several 100 kilometers away, or let's say planning a short trip to middle or southern part of China for holiday, etc., etc. I probably need to do it during the weekends or even in a longer time period. But now with this network system, I could just book a ticket and go there within several hours. So in a way that my living circle, or this so-called what I call the reachable boundaries of my daily life, got expanded because of this traffic network. And what interesting about this is that it's not only influences people's daily routine on an individual level. It's like it's more convenient, faster, more exciting, and expand your life circle and stuff. But also it influences the city itself as a whole with the overall development strategies. For example, like employment strategies, housing strategies, and city collaborations and tourism, and so on and so forth. like for example, in Suzhou, you could totally like work in Shanghai and live in Suzhou. So that's it completely changes like the housing strategies and also the employment strategies and also the development and the collaboration and all those relation between different cities. It could be much more flexible and with a lot of more possibilities to develop.
Actually, you're close to the big cities, even if you're living in the old small town.
Yeah, exactly.
Just few hours from you, then you're in the big city. Tell me, Shang, how is the biking culture in China?
Well, I think biking culture it's also part of the slow traffic system in China, and also people pretty much like to bike, but I don't. I think it's not uh, as normal, or not normal, like as often as people who do it in here in Europe. Like they have this a very often used the bicycle. But I think people who live in Suzhou mostly they will take the public transport like metro or bus. But
Is
they
it is
yeah.
it because of the distance between like A and B, or just because it's not part of the culture that you're using, or maybe the infrastructure not supporting this kind of transportation?
Well, I think partly yes, because I think there are also some differences between the green spaces or the green space strategies in Suzhou and in most of the European cities, because uh, how to put it, it's like the if you look at the street or if you look at the street sections and they will have this green surfaces or the grass surfaces along the street so that um, the biking is separated from the pedestrian and is separated from the cars so that they will have um, they will have like their own bike lanes, but at the same time those small sections where they have this turnings and all those sometimes they got blocked by those green spaces, so that it's I think it's kind of like for local people is probably not that convenient comparing to taking a bus or a metro.
How is the green infrastructure?
Well, for the green spaces and infrastructures, I think Suzhou could be one of the typical city that represents both traditional and modern urban landscapes in China, because it has not only the typical Chinese traditional landscapes and classic gardens, and actually that's what Suzhou is famous for, but also with the recent developments, it also got this fantastic urban landscape in a modern fashion, which is this super nice green corridor along the road and the water and lake, and these urban parks and nature, a natural wetland reserve, etc., etc. So it's actually really great to live around by those green spaces in the city.
And like this, you mentioned the section of a street. If you describe for us like a typical, I know there are so many different, but like a typical section, a street section, how what the different function will be. Can you see
Yeah,
trees? Can you see like benches and so on?
yeah, for sure. I mean, this is actually quite interesting topic to talk about, especially if you compare the street section in Suzhou to the street sections in Stockholm, because the street it very much the street section in Stockholm is pretty much similar with the normal street section, except for example for its sidewalk, like from where I live now. So if you compare it to some normal sidewalk or the street section of a street, um, in here it's a little bit wider for the pedestrian or the sidewalk, and the reason for this I think mostly because it's in a residential district or community, so that people could walking around more and driving around, walking around more than driving around, so that making the walking street and sidewalk driver is also like adjusting different priorities for different context. And also another interesting thing is that if you look at the section of the normal street here, um, typically from the surface material perspective, you would see the car road, and then you see the curve, and then you will see the trees, and then the bench, and the pedestrians. And then from the materials perspective, you will see most of the materials are hard surface material like rock, stone, brick, or wooden, etc. Whereas if you check the street section in Suzhou, and you will find that there are quite a part of the surface that a soft surface like a grassland, and you would see a lot of grass surface along the street in stock. You wouldn't see a lot of those grass surface along the street in Stockholm, right? It's mostly, I think, with the stone and the
Yeah.
rock pavement. So this comparison to me is very interesting because you can actually kind of figure out the reason behind those living environment changes. For example, from my personal understanding, the hard surface one here in the Stockholm, that would be majorly beneficial to the accessibility and the walking experience for the people. So in that sense, you could have more space and room to move around and walk. And on the other hand, the soft surface one in Suzhou, it's mainly contributing to the urban environment strategies or ideas on the larger scale, like, say, sponge city or micro environment control, etc. But
Yeah.
since since those soft surface or grassland are normally not accessible to the people, so that you probably could just look at from the distance, but you cannot actually interact with the land or the green spaces. So in some way, it becomes a blocking landscape to divide the driving part and the walking part, or sometimes biking part. So for me, especially as an urban designer, it's super fascinating to see those differences in a small scale, and then you discover that it's somehow actually linking to the much larger scale system.
Yeah, and also you mentioned the point of about the hard surface and soft surface. It's more about the hard because also you don't need really to take care of it because in case you have some plants or let's say grass, then you need like to take care of it, to cut it and so on. So it's less, what do you call it, service and so on, and which
Mhm.
means it's less money for the municipality to put on. So hard surface have some good advantages, but same way disadvantages. And
Yes.
Shang, I wanted to ask, is it livable 24/7 or just during the working hours?
Oh, the nightlife in Suzhou is great, definitely. In fact, this is actually one of the parts where I really missed about Suzhou, in a way, because at night it's normally it's not an end of your daily life. Really, it's actually a starting point of another living experience. So for example, it's quite accessible to the major public facilities and services 24/7 all year round in the city. And also, you could go out and have some street food or like grab a drink in the bar or get some stuff in convenience store at 2 a.m. in the morning. So these are very like part of the nightlife, especially for local people. It's like they spending the nighttime in the city. This routine has become their part of their lives. You would see tons of people going out and take a walk in the park or like on the walking street or around the water around 9 or 10 p.m. or even later. So on the other hand, what I want to say is the urban system, it actually and also with the together with the facilities in the urban is also really supporting this sort of lifestyle for the citizens and kind of laid out the platform and act as an enabler to provide this kind of activities and this kind of lifestyle to happen to the people, so which I think is all awesome.
Yeah, so basically it's livable 24/7.
Yes.
By the way, you're a really good storyteller. I need to admire that.
Thank you so much.
You just
I'll try
made
my
me
best.
want you just made me want to travel to Suzhou and just experience everything you're talking about.
Oh, that's my goal.
So then you moved to Stockholm.
Yeah.
And you moved here because of the master program that we studied together, right?
Yes.
How was the experience from landing here, and where did you live? And so we basically now tell us the story about Stockholm from the same elements that we were talking about, like the neighborhood, the community, life, street sections, greenery, and so on. So yeah, the mic is yours.
Yeah, of course. I mean, for me, Stockholm is quite a city with elegance, really. It is also a city with innovative possibilities, a lot of those different chances and opportunities. And apart from the daily life in Stockholm, like the normal life as an individual, but the city really enables you, really provides you all these platforms and stages to realize or to try out what you want to do or what you want to achieve. So you really got a bunch of support as an individual from the city or from the organizations or from the municipalities. So I think that is super amazing. It brings you this very energetic spirit from the city, so that you will have this um, kind of like a very independent ability to reach out what you want to reach. So that kind of part is what most impressed me and what makes me more excited about this city. And well, currently I live in a small community close to the Holman, so it's pretty much close, also close to the waterfront, and it's a pretty nice neighborhood. And well, the street level, as I mentioned before, is quite similar with the normal street in Stockholm, except for the sidewalk is a little bit wider. And I think also from the public transportation perspective in Stockholm is also very convenient. Well, except for its price, it's more expensive than it is in Suzhou.
Welcome to Stockholm.
Yeah, but I mean, in general, I think it's very good
So so
because
so
yeah.
can you survive in Stockholm without having a car?
Yeah, definitely. I believe so. It's like that's what I'm trying to talk about. In those traffic plans and transportation strategies for Stockholm, and me as a urban planner and designer, you could really see the map and feel it in a city that they really strive for those principles of such as people comes first, or more walking than biking, less driving, or more public transport, less private transport, and so on and so forth. So most of the streets and roads are on the right scale for both city and people. It's not like, you know, comparing to Suzhou, I would say on the scale level, most of the street in Suzhou, in particular, outside of Old Town, because in the Old Town, what's happening there. It's kind of like a very quite narrow down on the scale. But outside, with a very quite developed and modern section of the Suzhou town, it's a very wide street, mostly for the better traffic, like a car traffic. So some roads would even go to like 60 meters wide. So from that part, you can feel that some people still in Suzhou can still prefer to rather driving than taking uh, public transport. Whereas in Stockholm, as you can see from the public transport, and more people would rather take the public transport than the private cars. So I think that's a very good and very interesting.
Yeah, and how would you describe a typical street section in Stockholm? I know also back again, it's good to mention that there are so many different section and depends on the area, but for
Yeah.
you, how would you like to describe a typical one from Stockholm?
Well, I think the typical one or the most impressive one that that I had in my mind is the section where you have the car road in the middle, but also you will also have this bike lane on the side, and then you have the special uh, or they use the different paint and different materials to distinguish those two different lanes for the bicycle and the cars. And then at the same time, it's also accessible from the bike lane to the pedestrian. So that's kind of those three different types, except for the car road in the middle. that they are quite accessible and interchangeable from one to another. So I think for me, that's like most innovative street section that happens in Stockholm. But of course,
Yeah,
you could have like a narrow, like a road, very traditional, like old, like a Gamla stan in Stockholm, like road. Yeah.
exactly, the old town. And how is the green infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much uh, something similar to what I try to compare with Suzhou and Stockholm, because I think, but there are some differences. I think in here, for me personally, I feel like here in Stockholm, the green spaces is more how to say, it's like a people in the city embrace the nature. It's the green space is a more natural, it's more nature landscape, like you take use of the nature landscape and then turn that into part of your cityscape. Whereas in Suzhou, as we know, also because of the topography and all those reasons, it's kind of a plain, so it doesn't have that much like a mountain or forest. So that in the sense that most of the green structure and the green spaces in that particular land, either it's like a wetland or it's like an agricultural land, it's a green spaces. So that for the other part, like the natural reserve or the park, it's mostly um, how to say, half natural, half man-made. So for me, this is the huge difference, because also you could feel the environment and atmosphere here in Stockholm, that it's like a natural city. It's
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
it's like a city in the middle of the forest.
exactly, exactly.
Yes, and do you think this city in the middle of the forest is livable 24/7, or how do you experience it?
Ooh. Well, I think, I mean, maybe it's because my personal experience. I'm from like, I lived in China, and then they have a fantastic nightlife in there, or because of it's in Stockholm and it's in Nordic countries, and I think compared to the other cities, Stockholm is it's quite a good boy type of city when it comes to the nightlife or the 24/7 life. You know, I think maybe because of the geographic or the environmental reason. And if you think about Stockholm City as a person, it has quite a standard, regular time schedule. You know, go to bed at the standard 10 o'clock, and then shut down the excessive services and functions, get a good rest, and open it again the next day. But personally, personally, I prefer a bit more options at night when you walk around the city, because from my perspective, the city will have another different kind of charm during the nighttime. So I hope there could be more things available or happening at night here in Stockholm in the future.
Yes, I understand your words and also feel them because it's the same feelings for me when I lived in Milano. Then I come back here to Stockholm. As you mentioned, like things, city almost close when it's 5 p.m. The shops close.
Yeah,
There is a nightlife, but not as crazy at, let's say, in Barcelona or Milano. And I, as you mentioned, it's due to the culture and so on. But also, a city will be more beautiful and more livable if there is something happening after 5 o'clock.
yeah.
If we now we are almost comparing between the two different cities. So
Yes.
what are you missing from the city, your city in China, in Stockholm?
Well, as myself, to be a little bit selfish, I would say, of course, I miss the food back home. That's the because I always like a little bit craving for the home food, hometown food that in my home. But I also very much enjoy the Swedish food in here, and also a lot of Swedish cuisines. Um, the other part that I missed, I think, is also this living atmosphere. I think, but I wouldn't use the word miss, because I can feel the difference, and I can see those benefit for both of the living styles. Um, of what I'm talking about, because in here I feel like people in here are more independent, so they have more strong will or ability to do things like as individual, so that they got more inspired by other things. But um, back in China, in Suzhou, like a lot of those activities and those living environment gives you a feeling of a group, more of a group, so that you do a lot of things together, either with your families or with your friends. Um, especially during especially in the work and also in the daily life. So I think that's probably something that I had a little bit missing um, in here in Stockholm.
Yes, I can understand that. And if what are the things that could be done better from the urban planning and design point of view that inspired from Suzhou can be done here in Stockholm?
um, well, I think actually if you think about the urban structure here in Stockholm, honestly, I would say from the individual level or from the residential level, I wouldn't think of any better strategies or choices, because I think here in Stockholm, the living experience is perfect. It's really good, except for its geographical reasons, or with this very long nights and stuff. But from the urban structure wise, or as an urban designer, I would say Stockholm did a pretty good job in terms of this human or people oriented strategies, and with all those sustainable plans. I would say if I'm gonna say like one thing inspired from Suzhou, is that in Suzhou, I would say it's like people have more this kind of narrow sort of, maybe because I live in that old town, so that I'm kind of used to get to that close range to those small scale, and also like having this feeling of living outside of the home still feel like a home, this kind of feeling, so that I think in that sense, Stockholm, like where I live in now, it's more like you go outside and then you turn into like either working mode or socializing mode, and then you go back home, you become like a very homebody, or yeah.
Yeah, so there are fixed, let's say, moods. Or
Yeah, in a way, yes.
yes, yes. Well, Sean, you're a great and fantastic urban planner and designer. I'm working also on urban planning, and we are designing the future cities. So I would,
Yes.
you're studying different universities, Netherlands, Sweden, also from China. I would love to hear from you. How do you define a smart city?
Well, a smart city is actually a very broad concept to me, because I think everyone has their own interpretations about what smart city is, or about this concept overall. But to me, I think personally, smart city would be like showing smart in an organic way. Because I always like, maybe this is like a personal opinion, or like my own opinion, because I always like to take city as a body, or as any living form, that it has its own circulation, or has its own room or space to grow, to develop, and it has also has its own metabolism and its update and adapting circles and something like that. So it's always been in a dynamic balance, in a way, to grow. But it's not saying that I don't believe in technology. I do believe, and I do think that our technological advancement gives us a great opportunity to get close to what we want to achieve, and it acts as a scaffoldings to reach out something that we could never reach before. It's just, I like to see a city grows naturally, and not like expanding aggressively.
Yes. And do you think that Stockholm is a smart city?
Of course, to me, being a smart city doesn't mean it has to be like cities in sci-fi movies that everything is incredibly fancy with cutting-edge technological advancement. I mean, it means it is smart enough to be more human oriented, so that the city could really be good nest for the essential element, people to live in comfortably. I think that would be um, one explanation or one interpretation of what smart city really is. And I think in that terms, Stockholm has really great examples about how to put human first over the other like kind of systems.
Yeah, yeah. So very interesting, Sean. It was really cool and interesting to listen to you, especially you're telling the story from the urban planning point of view. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, thank you. It's a really pleasure also for me to share all my experience and story with you and with the rest of the audiences.
Yes. So, Sean, how would you like to summarize what you were telling, some of your reflection and three takeaway messages for all the people that are listening to Urbanistica podcast?
Well, I think since I really like to be, or I really into this role that I defined it for myself as a seeker. So I would say um, in the future, I'm probably gonna seek more as a seeker to experience more, to see all those different things in the different cities and different cultures and regions. So for me, I will be thinking the first takeaway message will be always being curious. Because for me, I think curiosity is the actual original motivation for any of the purpose or the passion that you will have in the future. So always staying being curious, and then you will always have this great questions that you could ask about to yourself. And there is also another famous quote that it's not always about the better questions, it's not always about better answers, about better questions, right? You know that quote. So that always being curious, so that it keeps you up and keeps you um, finding new things around you. And the second takeaway message I would be saying, it's always thinking about the relations. Because in before, I have this I can't remember exactly where I saw this, but there is a line I saw like accidentally, but it becomes like part of it's stuck in my head. It's like a thing in my head. It goes like a genius is always forced relations. It sounds a little bit odd, but I think for me, I really see all those potentials. Like sometimes I see those different things, and I see some common relations and these connections between each different things, or even different subject, or even different fields. So those kind of a mentality, or this kind of way of thinking, that you always think about the relations between different things, and you're trying to get more and more like things that in common between different things, that could be really inspirational and inspiring when it comes to like figure out a new solution or making some new innovations, especially us as a designer or urban planner. So I think that's a really important. And the last one, I think, last but not least, takeaway message will be, I think that will be a little bit personal. Just be a seeker. I think it is a great experience to seek for different lifestyle, to seek for different images and different experience in the world, so that the more you seek, the more that you will understand a lot of things. It comes naturally. It's like, it's not saying that you go into the different places and then all of a sudden knew a lot of things. It's not like that. It's like when you go through all those different processes in the different cities, and then at some point you will have this sort of like the second takeaway message, like you kind of like this intuitive connection in your head, that you all of a sudden it gets you a lot of answer, or it answers you a lot of things based on what you see. So that be a seeker, go brave, go to the outside.
Wow, Sean, that was very inspiring and powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, reflection with us. And I would love to get three hashtags from you.
Oh, that's I would say that's pretty much will be the similar with the messages, but I would say first hashtag would be keeping curious. hashtag keeping curious. And the second one would be hashtag force relations. The third one would be hashtag be a seeker and be brave.
Yes, amazing, amazing. Again, thank you so much, Sean, for giving your time and for inspiring us.
Thank you for giving me the chance to share my story, and I'm really glad to be here.
Yes, and hopefully we meet again after all the coronavirus is gone. So hopefully see you in Stockholm soon.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. Please follow Instagram account and subscribe the YouTube channel. If you have any great story that makes our city smarter, please contact me. I am Mustafa Sharif. Have a good life.